The rain hammered the parking lot of Murphy's truck stop, like bullets against concrete, each drop exploding into 1,000 smaller pieces before disappearing into the darkness. It was the kind of November night that chilled you to the bone, the kind that made smart people stay inside with hot coffee and warm blankets. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. But Sarah Chen wasn't smart people anymore. She was desperate people. She stood under the flickering neon sign, her thin jacket doing nothing against the cold, her sneakers soaked through from puddles she no longer bothered to avoid. In her arms, wrapped in a towel that had seen better days, was Max, a golden retriever puppy, whose brown eyes still held trust despite everything. If you believe that sometimes angels arrive on motorcycles, that kindness can come from the most unexpected places, then pause for a moment. Like this video, subscribe to our channel, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from tonight. Because this story will restore your faith in humanity when you need it most. Sarah hadn't eaten in 4 days. The puppy hadn't eaten in 2. She'd given him the last of her food, half a stale sandwich she'd found behind a gas station, and watched his tail wag like she'd served him a feast. That was when she knew she had to make the hardest decision of her 23-year-old life. 6 months ago, Sarah had been a college student with dreams bigger than her small-town upbringing. She was studying veterinary medicine at the state university, working 2 part-time jobs to pay for classes her scholarship didn't cover. She'd found Max abandoned behind her apartment building when he was barely 6 weeks old, his mother nowhere in sight. The local shelter was overcrowded, and they told her honestly that a puppy that young probably wouldn't make it. So, Sarah had taken him home. She'd bottle-fed him every 2 hours, slept on the floor beside his makeshift bed, nursed him through pneumonia that nearly took him twice. Max had become more than a pet. He was her anchor, her reason to keep going when the stress of school and work threatened to drown her. Then her world collapsed in a single phone call. "I'm sorry, honey." Her mother's voice had cracked through the phone. "The cancer's back. It's everywhere this time." Sarah had dropped out of school that same day, used her tuition money for a bus ticket home to Oregon. She'd spent the last of her savings on her mother's experimental treatments, sold everything she owned except the clothes on her back and the puppy who'd refused to leave her side through it all. Her mother had died on a Tuesday morning in October, holding Sarah's hand and whispering, "Take care of that dog. He loves you more than life itself." 2 weeks later, the medical bills arrived. $60,000 that insurance wouldn't cover. Bills that followed Sarah like hunting dogs, no matter where she went or how fast she ran. She'd been living in her car for 3 weeks now, a 1998 Honda Civic with a broken heater and a gas tank that stayed mostly empty. She'd applied for job after job, but without an address, without clean clothes for interviews, without anyone to watch Max during work hours. The rejections piled up like winter snow. That's how she'd ended up here, at Murphy's truck stop on Interstate 80, holding the only thing she had left that someone might want. The truck stop was busy despite the weather. Big rigs idled in neat rows, their diesel engines rumbling like sleeping giants. Inside the brightly lit convenience store, truckers bought coffee and road snacks, families stretched their legs during long road trips, and travelers sought shelter from the storm that showed no signs of stopping. Sarah had been watching the parking lot for 2 hours, working up the courage for what she knew she had to do. She'd seen the group of motorcycles arrive during a brief break in the rain, 8 Harley-Davidsons lined up under the covered area near the diesel pumps. Their owners were inside now, leather jackets hanging from their shoulders, patches declaring their allegiance to something called the Iron Brotherhood. They looked dangerous. They looked exactly like the kind of people her mother had warned her to avoid. But they also looked like people who might have money, might be willing to take a puppy off the hands of someone who couldn't care for him anymore. Max whimpered softly in her arms, his small body shivering despite the towel. He was getting weaker by the hour, and Sarah knew that her love alone wasn't enough to keep him alive anymore. Sometimes love meant letting go. Sometimes it meant admitting you'd failed the one thing that mattered most. She pushed through the glass doors of the truck stop, the blast of warm air hitting her like a physical force. The fluorescent lights made her squint after hours in the dark parking lot, and she stood there for a moment, dripping onto the rubber floor mats, trying to locate the bikers in the crowd. They weren't hard to find. 8 men clustered around a corner table in the attached diner, their presence commanding attention even though they were sitting quietly, eating burgers and drinking coffee like ordinary people. But there was nothing ordinary about them. These were men who'd seen things, done things, survived things that left marks on their souls as clearly as the scars visible on their hands and faces. The biggest of them noticed her first. He was maybe 50, with gray streaking through his black beard and eyes that missed nothing. When he looked at her, really looked, taking in her soaked clothes, her hollow cheeks, the way she held the puppy like he was made of glass, something shifted in his expression. Sarah's legs felt like water as she approached their table. Every step required conscious effort, every breath, a deliberate choice to keep moving forward. The conversations around her seemed to fade into background noise until all she could hear was the thundering of her own heartbeat and Max's soft breathing against her chest. "Excuse me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The bikers turned toward her, and she felt the weight of their attention like spotlights. "I'm sorry to bother you, but—" Her throat closed up. The words she'd practiced in the parking lot abandoned her completely. The big man with the gray beard leaned back in his booth, his voice gentler than his appearance suggested. "What's wrong, kid?" That simple question, asked with genuine concern, broke something inside Sarah that had been holding together through sheer stubbornness. Tears she'd been fighting for weeks spilled over, and her voice cracked when she finally managed to speak. "Take my puppy," she said, the words coming out in a rush. "Please. We haven't eaten in 4 days, and he's going to die if someone doesn't help him. I can't take care of him anymore." The silence that followed felt endless. Sarah stood there, water dripping from her clothes onto the linoleum floor, holding Max while 8 of the toughest-looking men she'd ever seen stared at her with expressions she couldn't read. She was prepared for them to laugh, to tell her to get lost, to call security and have her removed for bothering customers. She wasn't prepared for what actually happened. The gray-bearded man stood up slowly, his massive frame unfolding from the booth like a mountain rising from the earth. He looked at Sarah, then at the puppy in her arms, then back at Sarah. When he spoke, his voice carried the kind of authority that made people listen. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Sarah," she whispered. "I'm Jake," he said, extending a hand that could have crushed hers but held it gently instead. "This here's my club, the Iron Brotherhood, and we don't take people's puppies, Sarah. We help people keep them." Before Sarah could process what that meant, Jake turned to his brothers. "Boys, we got a situation here. Tank, call ahead to that all-night vet clinic in Reno. Tell Doc Martinez we're coming in with an emergency. Diesel, grab some of those sandwiches from the cooler. Preacher, see if they got any dog food in this place. Hammer, warm up the van, we're gonna need more room than the bikes." The bikers moved with purpose, each man taking on his assigned task without question. Sarah watched in stunned silence as these dangerous-looking strangers mobilized to help her like she was family. "I don't understand," she said, her voice shaking. "I don't have any money. I can't pay you back." Jake's expression softened. "Kid, let me tell you something about the Iron Brotherhood. Every man at that table has been where you are right now. Maybe not exactly the same situation, but rock bottom all the same. We've all been hungry, desperate, out of options. And we remember what it felt like when someone reached down and pulled us up." He gestured toward the booth where his brothers were already making room. "Sit down. Tell us your story. And don't worry about that puppy, he's gonna be just fine." As Sarah sank into the warm booth, Max still clutched in her arms, she began to understand that she'd stumbled into something bigger than a chance encounter. These weren't just motorcycle enthusiasts out for a weekend ride. These were men who'd formed a brotherhood based on shared pain and mutual protection, who'd taken it upon themselves to be the safety net for people who'd fallen through every other crack in the system. The food arrived faster than seemed possible: hot sandwiches, soup that steamed in ceramic bowls, and a small dish of puppy food that Tank had somehow procured from the convenience store's limited pet section. Max ate like he was starving, which he was, his tail wagging weakly as the first real nutrition he'd had in days hit his empty stomach. "Easy there, little man," said Diesel, a wiry man with gentle hands who seemed to know something about caring for animals. "Too much too fast, and you'll make yourself sick." Sarah tried to eat, but her stomach had shrunk so much that even the soup was almost too much. She managed a few spoonfuls, then found herself telling these strangers things she'd never told anyone: about her mother's death, about the medical bills, about sleeping in her car, and choosing between gas money and food money every single day. "Where's your car now?" asked Preacher, a man whose nickname seemed ironic until you heard him speak and realized he carried himself with the quiet dignity of someone who'd found peace after great struggle. "Couple miles down the road," Sarah admitted. "Ran out of gas yesterday. I walked here." "In this weather?" Hammer's voice carried outrage on her behalf. "Jesus, kid. You could have died out there." That's when Sarah learned about the Iron Brotherhood's true mission. They weren't a motorcycle club in the traditional sense. They were veterans, survivors of abuse, men who'd lost everything and rebuilt themselves into something stronger. Their patches told stories of service, sacrifice, and second chances. Their brotherhood had formed around a simple principle: no one gets left behind. "We started this club 15 years ago," Jake explained as the warmth from the food and the heated building slowly brought feeling back to Sarah's extremities. "Me and Tank there, we met in a VA hospital. Both of us were pretty broken up, him from an IED in Afghanistan. Me from, well, let's just say coming home from war ain't always the hardest part." Tank nodded. "We figured out pretty quick that the system's got holes in it. Big holes. People fall through them every day: kids aging out of foster care, vets who can't adjust, families hit by medical bankruptcies. Society likes to pretend these problems don't exist, but we see them. So, we do something about it," added Preacher. "Been riding across the country for a decade now, looking for people who need help. Sometimes it's as simple as a hot meal and a tank of gas. Sometimes it's more complicated. Like tonight," Jake said, his eyes meeting Sarah's across the table. "Tonight, it's about getting you and this puppy somewhere safe, fed, and warm. Then we figure out the next step." The transformation happened gradually, but it was impossible to miss. As word of Sarah's situation spread through the truck stop's informal network, other travelers began to take notice. A family from Wisconsin contributed $20 from their vacation fund. A trucker named Big Martha, who'd been hauling freight for 30 years, handed over a bag of groceries she'd bought for her next run. An elderly couple pressed a $50 bill into Sarah's hand before she could protest, their eyes bright with the kind of inbred kindness that transcends generations. But it was the bikers who took charge of the situation with military precision. Jake made phone calls on an old flip phone that looked like it had survived several wars. "Yeah, Doc, it's Jake from the Brotherhood. I know it's late, but we got an emergency. Young woman and a puppy, both malnourished. 20 minutes out." Tank disappeared outside and returned with Sarah's keys. "Found your car. She's about 3 miles down 80, just like you said. Diesel's bringing her back with a full tank and a jump start for that battery. She'll be waiting for you when you're ready." "You don't understand," Sarah protested weakly. "I can't afford, kid," Hammer interrupted, his voice gruff but not unkind. "You're not paying for nothing. That's not how this works." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Preacher had been quiet through most of the conversation, but now he leaned forward, his weathered face serious. "Sarah, I want you to listen to me real careful. You did something tonight that took more courage than most people have in their whole lives. You asked for help. You put your pride aside for the sake of someone you love. That takes guts. Doesn't feel like courage," Sarah mumbled, scratching Max behind the ears as he slept in her lap, his belly finally full for the first time in days. That's because real courage never does, Tank said quietly. Real courage feels like being scared out of your mind and doing what needs to be done anyway. The vet clinic was a 20-minute ride in Tank's modified van, which had been converted with bench seating specifically for situations like this. Sarah sat in the back with Max, surrounded by men who should have terrified her, but instead made her feel safer than she had in months. They rode in comfortable silence, the rumble of the engine mixing with the rain on the roof to create a lullaby that nearly put her to sleep. Dr. Elena Martinez was waiting for them when they arrived, the clinic's lights blazing against the darkness. She was a small woman with kind eyes and quick hands who'd been working with the Iron Brotherhood for years, providing free medical care for animals belonging to people who'd fallen through society's cracks. "Let's take a look at this little guy," she said, gently taking Max from Sarah's arms. The examination was thorough but gentle, Dr. Martinez explaining each step as she worked. "He's dehydrated and underweight, but nothing that can't be fixed with proper nutrition and care. You've actually done a remarkable job keeping him healthy under the circumstances." "I tried," Sarah said, tears threatening again. "I really tried. Honey, doctor," Martinez said firmly, "this puppy is alive because of your love and sacrifice. Don't you dare minimize that." The treatment plan was comprehensive: antibiotics for a minor respiratory infection, vitamins to combat malnutrition, high-calorie puppy food, and detailed instructions for nursing Max back to full health. When Dr. Martinez presented the bill, Sarah's heart sank. Even with the compassionate care discount clearly marked at the bottom, it was more money than she'd seen in months. Jake stepped forward and handed over his credit card without even looking at the amount. "Put it on there, Doc, and throw in a month's worth of that special food you mentioned." Back at the truck stop, the Brotherhood had been busy. They'd reserved the conference room typically used by trucking companies for driver meetings, transforming it into a temporary headquarters for Operation Sarah, as Diesel had dubbed it. The table was covered with maps, phone numbers, and resources they'd compiled in the hours she'd been gone. "Sit down, kid," Jake said, but his tone was gentle, not commanding. "We need to talk about your options." Sarah clutched Max closer, the puppy now bright-eyed and alert after his veterinary treatment. "I know what you're going to say, that I need to find him a good home with people who can actually take care of him, and you're right. I need a minute to say goodbye." The silence that followed was broken by Tank's unexpected laughter. "Jesus, kid, you really don't get it, do you?" "Get what?" Jake leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "Sarah, we're not here to take your dog away. We're here to help you keep him. Both of you are going to be just fine, but it's going to take some work." What followed was the most comprehensive support system Sarah had ever imagined. The Brotherhood had contacts everywhere: employers who didn't ask too many questions about employment gaps, landlords who were willing to work with people rebuilding their lives, social services advocates who knew how to navigate the system's bureaucracy. "There's a woman named Maria Santos in Sacramento," Preacher explained, consulting his notebook. "Runs a nonprofit that helps people transition out of homelessness. She's got a program specifically for young adults, job training, temporary housing, the whole package. And she loves dogs." "Tank's brother owns a chain of auto repair shops," Jake added. "Good honest work, pays decent wages, and they're always looking for people willing to learn." "You said you're good with your hands?" Sarah nodded, thinking of all the times she'd fixed her aging Honda with salvage parts and determination. "There's also this," said Hammer, sliding an envelope across the table. "Collection we took up from folks here tonight. Should cover gas money to get to Sacramento, maybe a week or two in a cheap motel while you get on your feet." Sarah opened the envelope and gasped. There had to be nearly $1,000 inside, 20s and 50s and crumpled tens that represented sacrifices from strangers who'd heard her story and decided to help. "I can't take this," she whispered, but her hands were shaking as she held the money. "You can, and you will," Tank said firmly. "Because someday, when you're back on your feet and doing well, you're going to pass it forward. You're going to see someone else in trouble, and you're going to help them just like we're helping you tonight. That's how this works." The emotional weight of everything that had happened in the past few hours finally caught up with Sarah. She'd walked into this truck stop, prepared to give up the thing she loved most in the world, convinced that she'd failed in every way that mattered. Instead, she'd found a family she didn't know existed, people who'd looked at her situation and seen not failure but potential. Why? She asked through her tears. Why are you doing this for a complete stranger? Jake's answer came without hesitation. Because 15 years ago, I was sitting in a different truck stop 3 states over, holding a loaded gun and trying to work up the courage to use it. My wife had left me, took our kids, said she couldn't handle what the war had done. To me, VA had denied my disability claim. I'd lost my job, my house, everything that made me feel like a man. He paused, his eyes distant with memory. This old biker named Red Dog sat down across from me in that booth. Didn't say much at first, just bought me dinner and listened to my sob story. Then he told me something I'll never forget. Son, the worst thing that can happen to a man ain't losing everything. It's giving up on himself. He helped me get clean, get my head straight, fight for my benefits. Saved my life, no question. Red Dog's gone now, Tank added quietly. Cancer took him 5 years back. But before he died, he made us promise to keep doing what he'd done, looking out for people who'd lost their way. This club, this brotherhood, it's his legacy. Sarah understood then that this wasn't charity in the traditional sense. This was something deeper, more profound, a network of people who'd been broken and rebuilt themselves into something stronger, who used their own scars as roadmaps to help others navigate similar terrain. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having blown itself out during the night. Sarah woke up in a motel room the Brotherhood had paid for. Max curled up beside her on the bed, both of them clean and fed and warm for the first time in weeks. There was a knock at the door, and she opened it to find Jake standing there with coffee and breakfast sandwiches from the truck stop's diner. "Morning, sunshine," he said with a grin. "Ready to start your new life?" The drive to Sacramento took 6 hours, with the Brotherhood escorting Sarah in a convoy that drew stares at every rest stop. They rode with purpose, their formation tight and protective, making sure everyone knew that Sarah wasn't traveling alone anymore. Maria Santos was waiting for them at the nonprofit's offices, a warm woman in her 50s who greeted Sarah like a long-lost daughter and immediately fell in love with Max. The program she ran was exactly what Sarah needed: a tiny apartment she could afford on a transitional income, job training in automotive repair that played to her natural mechanical aptitude, and a support system that understood the unique challenges of rebuilding a life from scratch. "You'll do just fine here," Maria said as she showed Sarah the small but clean studio apartment that would be her home for the next year. "We've had a lot of success stories come through this program. People who started with nothing and built beautiful lives for themselves." The Brotherhood stayed for the rest of the day, helping Sarah get settled, making sure she had everything she needed. As evening approached, and it came time for them to continue their journey, the goodbyes were harder than Sarah had expected. "You saved my life," she told Jake, hugging him with fierce gratitude. "Nah, kid," he replied, his gruff voice gentle. "You saved your own life. We just gave you a hand up when you needed it most." Tank pressed a business card into her hand. "That's got all our numbers on it. You ever need anything at all, you call us. Day or night, doesn't matter. Once you're Brotherhood, you're always Brotherhood." "Even though I'm not a biker?" Sarah asked with a small smile. "Especially because you're not a biker," Preacher laughed. "We need more people like you in this world. People with enough courage to ask for help when they need it, enough humility to accept kindness from strangers." As the 8 motorcycles rumbled to life and pulled out of the parking lot, Sarah stood in the doorway of her new apartment with Max in her arms, watching them disappear down the street. She knew she'd probably never see most of them again, but she also knew that what had happened over the past 24 hours had changed her in fundamental ways. 6 months later, Sarah was thriving in ways she couldn't have imagined. The automotive repair training had clicked immediately, tapping into natural talents she'd never known she possessed. She'd been hired full-time at Santos Auto Works, where her attention to detail and genuine care for customers had made her a favorite among the regular clientele. Max had grown into a beautiful, healthy dog whose playful nature and gentle temperament made him popular with everyone in the neighborhood. Sarah had started volunteering at the local animal shelter on weekends, using her newfound stability to help other pet owners facing difficult situations. But the most significant change was the letter she wrote to Jake 6 months after their meeting, along with a check for $500. Dear Jake and the Iron Brotherhood, it began, I wanted you to know that your kindness didn't just save my life, it taught me how to live again. I'm paying it forward, just like you said I would someday. There's a single mom at the shelter who's been sleeping in her car with 2 kids and a pregnant cat. I'm using your playbook hot meals, gas money, connections to, resources, and most importantly, the knowledge that she's not alone anymore. I've also started something new, the Second Chance Fund, in honor of Red Dog and everyone who's ever needed a hand up instead of a handout. We've helped 12 families so far, with more coming every week. The local newspaper wants to do a story about us, but I told them the real heroes ride motorcycles and asked for nothing in return except the promise that kindness would continue. Thank you for showing me that family isn't just about blood. It's about people who show up when the world gets dark. Max and I think about you every day, and we're living proof that sometimes the scariest-looking angels are the ones who love the hardest. With all my love and gratitude, Sarah and Max. The letter found Jake at another truck stop, 3 states away, where the Brotherhood was helping a veteran whose PTSD had cost him his job and his housing. When Jake read it aloud to his brothers, there wasn't a dry eye in the group. Red Dog would be proud, Tank said quietly, and everyone nodded in agreement. The ripple effects continued to spread. Sarah's story, when it finally made the local news, inspired others to start similar programs. The Second Chance Fund grew into a regional network of volunteers who specialized in emergency assistance for people and their pets. Animal shelters started partnering with social services to address the human-animal bond in crisis situations. Most importantly, the story reached other young people who were struggling in silence, showing them that asking for help wasn't a sign of failure, but an act of courage that could transform not just their own lives, but the lives of everyone they'd touch going forward. The Brotherhood continued their mission, crisscrossing the country on their motorcycles, looking for people who needed someone to believe in them. They carried Sarah's letter in their saddlebags, sharing it with others who'd lost hope, proving that one moment of I am said. Kindness between strangers could create waves of change that reached far beyond anything they'd originally imagined. And somewhere in Sacramento, a young woman and her golden retriever were living proof that the scariest-looking people sometimes have the biggest hearts, that family is about more than blood relations, and that angels really do ride motorcycles, they just wear leather vests instead of halos. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that kindness is the most powerful force in the universe, please like, comment, and share this video. Help it reach someone who needs to hear that they're not alone, that asking for help takes courage, and that there are still good people in this world willing to show up when it matters most. And remember Sarah's promise someday, when you're in a position to help, pay it forward. Because that's how we change the world, one act of kindness at a time. Tell us in the comments. Have you ever been helped by a stranger when you needed it most? Because sometimes the angels we pray for don't have wings, they have motorcycles. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.